Hey guys, before we start, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you have any feedback. Let's go to the story. I've always heard that families are supposed to be built on love, sacrifice, and shared history. That even if things aren't perfect, there's some invisible thread that holds it all together. But lately, I've started to wonder if some threads are more like ropes, ones tied around your neck under the guise of gratitude and obligation. I was raised in a home where nothing ever felt truly free. Every meal, every gift, and every ride to school came with a quiet price tag. It wasn't spoken out loud, not at first. But the message was clear. Everything you have is because we allowed it. Growing up, I tried not to let it bother me. I convinced myself that maybe all parents were like this. Maybe everyone grew up feeling like they were constantly repaying a debt they never asked to borrow. But the moment I knew something was off, really off, was the night my parents called a family meeting. I'm 27 now. Moved out at 21. I have a full-time job, pay my rent, and cover my bills. I'm not rich, not even close, but I make enough to live. I try to stay connected with my family, even when it's hard. I show up for birthdays, holidays, and the occasional barbecue. I send cards. I call. I make an effort. So when my parents called and said they wanted to have a sit-down with me and my siblings, I didn't think much of it. Maybe something was going on with the house. Maybe health news. Something serious but normal. I showed up at their place on a Saturday evening. My younger brother and sister were already there. Everyone looked tense. Mom was fussing in the kitchen. Dad sat in his usual recliner, arms crossed. I sat on the blank TV screen. No one said much. Finally, after we'd all sat down in the living room, my dad muted the tension by clearing his throat. "This isn't easy to talk about," he began. "But we need to be honest about the future. And about fairness." Fairness. A word that doesn't usually land gently when it comes from someone who's always had the upper hand. My mom jumped in after that. They said they were getting older, that bills were piling up, and that retirement wasn't going to stretch as far as they'd hoped. Then she said it. "We gave everything to raise you. Now it's time for you to give back." At first, I thought I misunderstood. But then my dad reached into a folder and pulled out a few sheets of paper. Printed charts. Lists. Numbers. They had calculated it. Everything they had ever spent on us. Our food, clothes, school supplies, birthday parties, sports fees, doctor visits, even diapers. I looked at the paper in my dad's hand like it was a joke. Maybe this was some elaborate prank, and any second now they'd laugh and tell us not to be so gullible. But no one laughed. They just sat there, looking at us like we owed them something enormous. Like they were collectors, and it was time to settle the account. I can still remember the way the room felt after my dad handed out those papers. Not heavy, not tense, just cold. Like something had quietly shifted and we weren't quite family anymore. We were numbers now. Line items. Debts. My parents had kept a literal spreadsheet tallying up the cost of raising us. And when I say everything, I mean everything. $1,950 for my braces. $3,600 for a used car they gave me when I was 17. Which had already belonged to my uncle. $14,800 labeled food and housing expenses, shared estimate. They even included $85 for a winter coat they'd bought me in 8th grade. There was no detail too small. They weren't just trying to prove a point. They were presenting an invoice. My brother stared at his paper with his mouth slightly open. My sister looked like she might throw up. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just kept rereading the numbers, trying to wrap my head around the idea that this wasn't some one-off moment. This was premeditated, calculated. Eventually, my mom broke the silence. "We're not asking for everything at once," she said gently, as if that made it better. "We've divided it into what we think are manageable monthly payments." My dad nodded. "You're adults now. You have income. It's time to share the burden." Burden. That's what we were. It's one thing to know deep down that your parents see you as a cost. It's another thing entirely to see the receipts laid out in Times New Roman, formatted and printed, ready for your signature. My sister, bless her, tried to stay calm. "So, we're just supposed to pay you back for being our parents?" Mom didn't flinch. "We sacrificed a lot for you. We didn't travel. We didn't upgrade the house. We put everything into raising you. All we're asking for is fairness." Fairness. That word again. I wanted to scream. They hadn't asked us to help with current bills. This wasn't about medical costs or a mortgage in crisis. They were charging us retroactively for our childhoods, as if we'd signed a contract the moment we were born, as if love was something to be reimbursed. I finally spoke, but my voice didn't even sound like mine. It sounded distant. Tired. What happens if we say no? My dad stared at me. We prefer not to go down that road. And that was it. A vague, quiet threat. Not explicit, but it's there. Hanging in the air. My sister started crying. My brother got up and walked outside. I sat there, gripping that ridiculous sheet of paper, and felt something crack. Not just disappointment, but the final, undeniable truth that I had always suspected and now could no longer deny. Their love had terms, and I had just defaulted. I didn't sleep that night. After leaving my parents' house, I drove around for a while with no destination in mind, just the radio on low and the street lights sliding past the windshield like ghosts. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, hoping I'd misunderstood something, that maybe it had come out wrong, that they didn't mean it the way it sounded. But I had the paper in the passenger seat, the spreadsheet, the bill, and no matter how many times I glanced at it, it didn't change. That coat from 8th grade was still there. That car I drove for 1 year before it died on the side of the highway was still listed as an asset. My entire existence up to the age of 18 had been dissected and assigned a value. And the value wasn't love. It was dead. The next day, I talked to my sister. We met up at a coffee shop, and she looked about as worn out as I felt. She said our brother wasn't answering calls. Not from her, not from our parents. He had ghosted the whole situation, and honestly, I didn't blame him. We talked in circles for almost an hour, trying to understand, trying to justify, trying to rationalize. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they'd been watching too many financial panic shows. Maybe someone had told them this was normal. But deep down, we both knew better. This wasn't panic. It wasn't poor judgment. It was control. Our parents had built a system where they gave just enough to claim sacrifice and withheld just enough to ensure dependency. And now that we were old enough to stand on our own, they were scrambling to keep the leash taut. This wasn't about money. It was about power. And they weren't ready to let it go. 2 days later, I got a follow-up email from my mom. Subject line, following up, payment plan. The message was cordial. Too cordial. Like she was talking to a tenant who missed rent. Just checking in to see when you plan to begin the repayment schedule. We're happy to adjust it if necessary, but please understand this is a family matter and not something we want to drag out. I stared at the screen for a long time. And then, without overthinking it, I replied, I never agreed to this. I didn't sign anything. You don't get to send me a bill for being your child. She didn't respond. Not that day. Not the next. But then I got a call from my dad. Straight to voicemail. His message? I suggest you take this more seriously. Family isn't just about what you get out of it. The irony of that line almost made me laugh. Because that's exactly what they were doing. I didn't know what to do next. Cutting ties sounded dramatic. But so did paying a monthly fee to stay in the good graces of the people who raised me. So I did what I always do when I'm overwhelmed. I went quiet. I didn't reply to any more emails. I didn't return calls. I let the conversation with my sister stall out. I just retreated. Into work. Into silence. Into the numbness that follows when something you believed in finally crumbles. Because the thing that hurt the most wasn't the money. It was realizing they'd thought about this for a long time. Talked it over. Typed it up. And waited for the moment to hand it to us like a bill we should have seen coming. 2 weeks passed. 2 long, quiet weeks. I didn't reach out. Neither did they. Every day, I checked my email with a dull ache in my chest, expecting another message, some escalation, some final ultimatum. But it didn't come. Instead, the silence thickened. It wasn't peace. It wasn't a resolution. It was the kind of silence that feels like standing in a hallway with every door closed. And it started to eat at me. Not because I missed them, but because I felt like I'd been uninvited from something I never asked to attend. I went back and forth in my mind. Part of me wanted to just send a single message. I'm done. To draw a clean line. To walk away and mean it. But another part of me, the part that still flinched when I saw Mom light up on my phone screen, kept holding on to the possibility that maybe, somehow, this wasn't real. That maybe I'd misunderstood something. That maybe they would come to their senses. That maybe the version of family I thought I had still existed, buried under all the ego and entitlement. That part of me was hard to let go of. Then, one night, my sister texted me. You should come over. They want to talk. I stared at it for 10 full minutes. She didn't say who they were. Didn't give context. Just the invitation. Part of me wanted to ignore it. But I didn't. Because some part of me still needed to hear it. To see if there was anything left worth saving. Their house felt different when I pulled into the driveway. Not warmer. Not colder. just unfamiliar. I stepped inside and the living room was set up like the last meeting. My parents on one couch, my sister and brother, who finally showed, sitting opposite. It looked like an intervention. It felt like a negotiation. My dad spoke first. He started with a speech about family legacy, responsibility, gratitude. Things that sounded noble in theory, but felt hollow when wielded like weapons. He said they'd reviewed our reactions and realized that maybe they'd approached it wrong. But the bottom line hadn't changed. They still believed we owed them. Not just money but respect, deference, loyalty. And to them, those things had dollar values. My mom added that we had a chance to make things right. That we could put this all behind us if we just agreed to the plan. It wasn't about the payment, she insisted. It was about the principle. And in that moment, something in me snapped. Not in anger, in clarity. Because I finally saw it for what it was. Not love, not even dysfunction, but a transaction. A system where everything had a cost and nothing was ever truly given. Not time, not care, not shelter, just loans with invisible interest. So I stood up, and I said, no, not loud, not angry, just steady. I don't owe you for existing. You chose to have kids. We didn't ask to be here. And if your love comes with a price tag, then I don't want it. My brother looked up at me. My sister blinked back tears. My parents didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, stunned. I walked out. No one followed. When I got home that night, I dropped my keys onto the counter and just stood in the kitchen for a while, trying to remember how to breathe like myself again. It was strange, how something so heavy could also feel like a release. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt free. Not from them, but from the version of me that thought I had to keep earning my place. I didn't owe anyone anything. Not for growing up, not for food I didn't choose, not for clothes that came with guilt stitched into every thread. It took years to reach that understanding, and only 10 seconds to say the word out loud. No, that one syllable opened a door I didn't even know I was allowed to walk through. The days that followed were oddly quiet. No calls, no emails. I think they thought I'd come crawling back, that I'd wake up with regret, that I'd miss the connection more than I resented the conditions. But I didn't. Instead, I started rebuilding. Not dramatically, not with fireworks or some grand life pivot, but slowly. I cleaned out my apartment, got rid of things that reminded me of obligations, gifts that came with strings, family portraits that felt staged, the heavy, silent artifacts of a life spent tiptoeing. I started saying no more often, to extra work I didn't have energy for, to social invitations that felt like performance, to people who only called when they needed something. It felt clumsy at first, like learning to walk again. But then something shifted. I started getting better sleep. I stopped clenching my jaw. I started texting people just to say hi, not because I needed to smooth something over. I began to trust myself, not because I had everything figured out, but because I was finally living by my values, not someone else's ledger. My sister texted me about a week later. I'm sorry. I didn't know they were serious until it was too late. I believed her. She had always followed the current, always tried to stay neutral. It wasn't malice, it was fear. Fear of rocking the boat. Fear of being cut off. Fear of being next. I told her she didn't owe me an apology, but that she did have a choice now. She didn't reply. Not right away. But that was okay. Some people need more time to undo the scripts they were handed. I couldn't wait for everyone to catch up. I had already started walking forward. A few months passed. Seasons shifted. The cold edge of everything that happened started to dull, not because I forgot, but because I no longer let it shape every moment of my day. It was like stepping out of a fog, the kind you don't realize you're in until the air clears and you finally see where you've been standing. I was more present now, more honest, more whole, not because life had suddenly become easier, but because I was finally living it on my terms. There were still moments where the silence from my parents echoed louder than I expected. On my birthday, I stared at my phone for longer than I'd like to admit. No message, no card, no carefully worded, "Hope you're doing well." Just nothing. And in that space, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt chosen by myself. Because silence can be empty. But sometimes, silence is clarity. And their silence told me everything I needed to know. I started seeing a therapist. It wasn't something I ever thought I needed before. I'd always prided myself on figuring things out on my own. But it turns out that trying to untangle a lifetime of conditional love on your own is like trying to perform surgery with a butter knife. The first few sessions were strange. I talked in circles, made jokes to fill the awkward pauses, tried to frame my story like a sitcom instead of the slow ache it really was. Eventually, I started telling the truth. And the truth was simple. I had spent most of my life being loyal to people who used that loyalty like currency. They expected me to give endlessly because that's what I'd always done. And when I stopped, I became the problem. Not because I was cruel, but because I was no longer convenient. That realization hit harder than anything else. Because I'd always thought that being the good one would protect me. That if I just kept giving, eventually they'd see me, value me, choose me. But they never did. They chose the system they built. And when I stepped out of it, they let the door close behind me. One afternoon, my therapist asked me something that stayed with me since. If you weren't trying to earn their love, what would your life look like? At first, I didn't know how to answer. But over time, that question became a compass. I started saying yes to things I wanted. Started creating routines that felt like mine. Started reaching out to people not because I should, but because I genuinely wanted to connect. I redefined family. Not with some big speech or dramatic reinvention. Just slowly. Through presence. Through boundaries. Through people who didn't need me to bleed to prove my worth. I don't think there's ever a perfect moment to declare yourself free from the expectations that shaped your life. There's no grand finale. No sudden thunderclap of healing. It's slower than that. Quieter. More like waking up one day and realizing you haven't flinched at a name in months. That you can see a family photo and not feel like a stranger in it. That you can talk about your past without shrinking to fit it. That's where I'm at now. I don't talk to my parents anymore. Not out of spite. Not out of punishment. But because I finally understand that relationships aren't about what you owe. They're about what you build. And some foundations were never solid to begin with. They haven't reached out again. Not after I walked out. Not after I said no. I've heard little things, secondhand updates through extended relatives, or the occasional social media glimpse. They're fine. Still in the same house. Still complaining about the cost of things. Still waiting, maybe, for one of us to change our mind. But that person won't be me. I've changed in ways they'll never fully understand. I've built a life without invoices. I've formed friendships that aren't transactions. I've learned to give because I want to, not because I'm scared of what happens if I don't. And more than anything, I've stopped trying to prove my value. That's what it all boiled down to, in the end. For years, I thought if I just showed up enough, worked hard enough, loved big enough, I'd earn my place. But love doesn't keep receipts. And if someone insists on handing you one, it's not love, it's leverage. Sometimes, I still think about that family meeting. The way my dad's voice sounded reading off dollar amounts like we were discussing a business transaction. The way my mom looked so calm, like she really believed what she was doing was just and fair. And for a long time, that memory hurt. Not because of what they asked for, but because of what it confirmed. That I had never really been seen, only used. But now, that memory doesn't sting anymore. It reminds me of the moment I wake up. The moment I realized I didn't have to play a part in their performance. That I could put the script down, walk off the stage, and write something entirely new. I don't know if I'll ever speak to them again. Maybe someday they'll reach out. Not for money, not for guilt, but with real accountability. But I'm not holding my breath. Because healing doesn't wait for apologies. And closure isn't something they can give me. I gave it to myself the moment I stopped trying to buy love with my silence. And the life I've built since? It's not flashy. It's not perfect. But it's mine. And for the first time, I don't owe anyone for that.